event, and that was what proceeded. See, that's what set up. Once Ukrainians had rejected any sort of being a satellite state of Russia, that's when Russia determined, well, if that's the way you're going to be, if you're not going to be in our sphere, if you're leaning towards NATO membership, you're leaning towards the EU, suddenly little green men show up in Crimea. Suddenly there's these so-called uprisings in the Donbass. It was a reactionary thing that Russia did to scuttle any sort of hopes of Ukraine joining NATO, because one of the NATO accession requirements is that you have no territorial disputes. So Russia created a territorial dispute to basically prevent Ukraine from ever joining NATO. That's what the Crimea really was about. So yes, I mean, there's far more eloquent people who can speak to the history of Ukraine, but that's it in a nutshell. And people should definitely understand that this is not a new thing. And again, Ukraine has been trying to avoid being seen as a lesser Russia, an adjunct state of Russia, since the early 20th century.
So I see a question in my DMs about there being not much info about what's happening on the ground. Currently, it is 5:03 in the morning. Sunrise is about 6:30. So sunrise in Moscow probably be in about 30 minutes. So the movement that we see today should begin around sunrise. Things will probably pick up. And even the things that have happened on the ground overnight, a lot of time it doesn't become evident until the next morning as far as troop movements and things like that.
Hey guys, real quick, I was seeing quite a few tweets earlier about some people were expecting Russia possibly could implement martial law as early as tomorrow. And so there was like this mad race by people to try to get expensive flights potentially out of the country. They don't trust Russia, and they're afraid of conscription that is mandatory and more widespread. How likely do you think that we could see martial law in Russia here soon, and some of these expansion of conscription, and then what would be the impacts of that on this war?
So as of now, I have not seen any official reports that martial law. It almost seems like a rumor floating around. So will it happen or not? I don't know. And about the flights, I would like to think the flights would be booked up regardless of that rumor. But I've not seen anything to confirm the martial law thing.
Apparently, the Duma will be meeting today to discuss it. Apparently, but this may also be. See, this is a risky move on Putin's part, because he may, if he asks for martial law, it may open up all the questions about what kind of support he has. It allows the Duma members to speak out against him, right? But that was the scuttlebutt, is that there's potentially going to be a vote upon it. I know that immediately it caused all sorts of things to happen. Literally, people were getting in their cars and trying to drive to Finland, or the Baltic states. We also saw like the official Russian rail line saw tickets from St. Petersburg to Helsinki rose to $1,500 for a single ticket, and then they're now out of tickets for days to come. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of people panicking about getting out of the Russia before this martial law thing goes down. Mysterious, you raised your hand. Go ahead. Oh, did you want to say one more thing?
I just wanted to add that Russia's also dealing with.
Hi everyone. speaking to Peter on and off. Hi, Peter, by the way.
Hello there. Welcome to the stage.
I'm sorry for bombarding you with intel questions, whatever you want to call it. For the past few days, my focus has been centered around Moldova, and particularly the amphibian behavior surrounding Moldova and what Moldova are doing about all of this, because I believe Moldova may be the rabbit hole, the next rabbit hole. And I've felt that for a long time. So, any intel that you can provide on Moldova, what they are saying, what they are doing, because I think they are a key part in this.
So again, as we were talking before, there's been this kind of breakaway portion of Moldova beyond the Dniester River. It's on the eastern banks of the Dniester River, and that's called then logically Transnistria, across the Dniester, right? So Transnistria is this. It's still ethnically mixed. Like, there's Russian speakers, there's Ukrainians, there's Moldovans. They've all been trying to live there, but under this very tense sort of breakaway republic, so-called republic, kind of like Donbass has, and that was a separate conflict. I think that started well before the Donbass crisis ever kicked off. So
but
Russian
it makes it an easy target, eh?
Yes, exactly. And so, so we do believe that that is exactly what a landing at Odessa would allow them to do, because it's not very far between Odessa and Tiraspol, which would be, that would be what would they do. And so in the past day, literally within the past 10 hours or so, Moldova has asked to join the EU. So now, again, we have to prepare everybody. Just because you ask doesn't mean you're going to get in. There have been countries like Turkey has been wanting to join the EU for a long while. I know,
but you and I both know that Moldova is the rabbit hole into more, Peter.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this would make it not just a war for Ukraine. This makes it, and I would just want to. I mentioned these words before, but I want to level set people who have not been in these spaces. There's two words for people to understand. The first one is called revanchism, and that's what Putin's been relying upon heavily. That where the territory of the Soviet Union has been, or even back before that, where the territorial extents of the Russian Empire existed, that should be Russia again.
Because that is his goal. That is his goal. And we all know that is his goal, to reclaim territory that he believes belongs to the Russian Empire. That is the goal.
And then the second word to teach people about is called irredentism. And irredentism comes from when Italy was trying. Remember, Italy had been all these city-states since the medieval period. And so there was no allow him to annex southern Brooklyn.
And that is what, in my belief, that is what this is all about. It's Russia reclaiming territory and land, going back to the Roman Empire, of them reclaiming what they believe is their land. But I fully, and I've spoken to you about this quite a bit, Peter, that I believe everyone is focused on the capital, and I believe it will come via Moldova and amphibian waters off the southern coast. I fully believe that. Fully.
Yeah, I think the only thing that has prevented this so far is there have been, again, we're OSINT, so we're not human. There's a different element of intelligence called humanint, right? Humint. And that is when you try and find out things from people, right? And we're not a human entity, but I've talked to people who believe that the reason why the landing didn't happen is because they're having some great confidence problems amongst the commanders of the Marine Force that they've not attacked because they've seen
But
what happened.
what about the amphibian force? What's happening? What is happening?
Sure,
Because
sure, sure, sure. No, so we've covered this before, but let's give a quick recap. A large amphibious force of about a dozen, I think it's like 10, 11, 12, something like that, amphibious ships have left Sevastopol, um, and they are somewhere off of Crimea and somewhere between that space and Odessa. We don't know at this time exactly where they are. There have been a lot of warnings from government officials in Ukraine that is their destination. But we have, at this hour, we have just not heard of
but
any sort of assault.
Are Moldova saying anything? What are the people of Moldova saying? Or is it silence? Is it radio silence?
No, again, so there was a couple of things. The first one was that early today, because of that map that was shown in Belarus, right, that showed that there was this clear arrow pointing straight from Odessa right into Moldova, and this being their, like they basically revealed their hands that they want to attack Moldova after they clear out Odessa. The Moldovan government has definitely, it's trying to mobilize. And that's why then later in the afternoon they asked to join the EU, right? Is in fact a very rarely even noticed security provision in the EU.
Yeah. So at
But
this moment they are susceptible.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I thought so.
I mean, same thing with Georgia, right? Georgia's not part of the EU, right? They're not part of NATO. So all of these countries, all former Soviet republics, are either going to line up with Putin, according to Putin, or they're going to be, taken by Putin. So that's basically what we're seeing at this time.
I think not a lot of. I think a lot of focus has been on the capital by all means, and I'm not denying that, and it should be via the convoy that's inflicting itself via the capital. But it's a smoke screen. It's a smoke screen for what's going on in the south and the
Yeah.
amphibian behaviors and Moldova and the vulnerable. Um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The
So
vulnerability within that part of the country is everything, I believe.
right. The other thing I just wanted to make people mindful of is that Transnistria used to be very, very populous. But since this kind of, supposed Transnistrian region, wanted to be its own government, a lot of people have left. Like more than half of the people in Transnistria have just, um, they've left for greener pastures. It's just like it's very much almost turned into a kind of a Rust Belt area, and think about that, just half of a population not being there anymore. So, it's just been devastating for them.
I think Peter, we are literally being thrown back to the Roman Empire, to when land was originally claimed by owners, and I think for some reason Putin wants the Russian Empire and the land that once was the Russian Empire back, and he will do whatever he can to get that back. Now, if there are philosophical whatever measures behind it, then it is what it is. But I think the propaganda and everything that is happening is making us all look at one pinpoint within the Ukrainian country, when actually I think it's a smokescreen. I do believe it's a smokescreen. I think the full invasion will come via the south, via Moldova, and via amphibian powers. But that's just me. But I don't know. You guys might have greater intelligence, but I fully believe that is the way it's going to go.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're just trying to keep on top of this. There's a lot of things that can go sideways yet. The first thing then to watch for is to see whether that flotilla shows up in front of Odessa. So thanks very much for asking. Do you want to be put back down to the audience then?
No, I'd like to stay as a speaker if I can.
Okay, fair enough then. All right, fair enough.
I'm well behaved. I promise. I will be well behaved.
All right, very good.
So I saw something that the United States has activated this nuclear incident response team, and someone sent me a DM really worried about what that meant. That's the response team to handle nuclear disasters. It doesn't mean anything warfare related.
Yeah, that's kind of like both a preventative and a observation and in case something happens kind of thing. If they weren't being activated, I would be concerned, is the thing, honestly.
Do we have intel from Moldova? Do we have anything legitimate from Moldova, from the land of Moldova? Anything?
There's all we know about in Transnistria is that the Soviet garrison, or not Soviet, I keep on using that, sorry, but the Russian garrison that's been there to kind of be so-called peacekeepers or territorial forces, those units have been just kind of idle. They've been defending the territory, but they have not been trying to do, for instance, they haven't tried to cross over to the rest of Moldova, nor have they done anything directly
So they haven't
against
done a
Ukraine.
Boris and gone in front of the TV with his massive tanks behind him going,
No.
"We support Belarus."
No, there's nothing yet right now.
But literally nothing from
Nothing
Moldova.
public.
Nothing.
I would be very surprised if there wasn't eyes on it, but there is nothing public.
Correct. I believe they want to kind of stick to the sidelines as of now.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, for self-preservation and those purposes.
That's not good, guys.
Yeah. Okay. We got some more questions coming. I'm trying to answer them. Thanks very much for your patience, guys. Is there another speaker that wanted to come forward?
I think I may have put them all off.
Okay, by the way, although I was mentioning irredentism and revanchism and these kind of like theoretical, philosophical reasonings behind Putin's stuff, I'm just going to put this out there. A lot more of it has to do with both his kind of, I hate to use this term, but more of his like oligarchic mafiosa mindset of like acquisition. He just wants more territory, wants more turf. The Don, wants to have, more control. And then there are resources in Ukraine. I don't think he sees that so much as the driving thing as increasing the overall population of Russia. Russia, in fact, has lost 1 million people this last year. And as I talked about, Transnistria's population going down, Ukraine's population has also been slowly dwindling since the breakup of the Soviet Union, and Russia's has as well. So I think that part of this is his desire to make this kind of like greater Russia, to bolster the size and scope of what a Russia is, because as it is right now, it's losing its standing in the world affairs. So
It goes back to the alpha territorial empire of the Roman and prior. It goes back way more.
Mm-hmm.
He lost the Ukraine, and he was pissed, and he's been pissed ever since, and he wants the Ukraine back, and he wants as much of the Russian Empire back as he can get. And I think it's literally as simple as that. He's a man on a mission that wants his empire back. That's it.
Well,
go ahead.
Putin hasn't been shy about his beliefs, and this isn't something that just came up. There's videos of him from when he first got into power talking about how first thing to have happened in the 20th century. And I think he really does believe that. So Yeah, and that's kind of, and it very reminiscent of his first speech he gave while the UN Security Council was going on, just talking about like Leninist policies and going back and trying to justify it. So he's justified it in his mind, and it's not really a surprise because we've known this for 2 decades.
But where does it stop?
I assume his ambitions would stop at the countries that used to compose of the Soviet Union. But I mean, that opinion, as much as we can try to get in Putin's head, we can't. And also, that's a non-starter. You know, there's no substance there to even begin with. So I think at this
Oh,
point,
there is substance, babe. There is substance.
Well, militarily, there isn't substance for him to go and invade all these countries there. I think that's
So
and analyze from the geopolitical perspective of what led up to this and the history and the current situation. But like, I feel like fundamentally, there's a lot of things that need to be said. Like a couple of points that need to be made. Like, for example, just a little bit of background. I'm a senior in a university, and my major's international relations with a Russian focus. So like, this is like stuff that is very topical for what I'm studying and stuff. And I think above all, though, a lot of the people like in my field, so to speak, who have this sort of background to talk about Ukraine and Russia and all the clashing of the two countries and the identities involved, and you know the cultural differences and the histories between the two, especially in the context of the Soviet Union. We can talk about that all day, but I think a lot of people, one of the big things that needs to be addressed in the conversations regarding Ukraine and Russia is that it's absolutely, and I think a lot of people are already going to understand this, but it's absolutely not a thing like a movie or a video game. I hear so many people on, you know, whether it's on mainstream news or the internet, just so many people talking as if they're experts on this. When on number one, they probably had never even heard of Vladimir Zelensky until a week ago. Two, they probably couldn't tell you who Sergei Lavrov is or Sergei Shoigu. And you have all these people talking about it like it's a fun little TV program that you catch up with your friends on, you know, like oh, did you see the last episode? What did you think about that crazy scene with this or that? And it's not a freaking TV show. It's a real tragedy. That's what it is. It's not something to be entertained by. And I think for all these people to be sitting very comfortably in American apartment buildings in their sofas as armchair generals is very insulting to the people of Ukraine and Russia. And you have all these people discussing military strategy and sorts of things like that. And it really is not for us to be talking about. I mean, it's one thing if we want to maybe understand and be informed, which is obviously difficult to find, you know, good information in light of so much misinformation out there. But like, fundamentally, people need to understand this is not a damn video game or a movie to be talking about. Like, oh, did you see what happened here? And you have all sorts of people, and this is a bit vulgar, but talking out of their ass, you know, who just need to understand it's a really serious thing, and it's not just because it's entertaining to you doesn't mean it should be. And I mean, we can talk all day long about, oh, here's what I think here and here's what I think there, like, but I think a lot of people are misunderstanding a lot of what they're seeing, and they're just maybe reading 5 bullet points and basing their entire view on a really complex topic over
I
such
hope you're
small
not referring
information.
to the people that are speaking in this space, because the people that are speaking and hosting this space are fully aware of what's going on, and they're providing real-time information to all of us.
I mean, it has been an issue. Okay, I will. I mean, there have been times this war has been so ludicrous, I have laughed, and you know, and if I laugh at the wrong time, if I mean, I can definitely get history wrong. I am not a native Ukrainian nor Russian speaker, you know, so I will admit I have been wrong, and you know, and people have been very angry with me personally, and sometimes with good reason, because you know, again, this is their lives, and you know, I just want to tell a quick history. hurricane, and I was sharing out information. She found out because somebody posted on a social media site that her uncle was dead. So that has struck me personally to the core, that this is not a video game. I take his words, I take Christopher's words gravely to heart, that these are people's lives. Again, I saw the video. This is why I won't show bodies, I won't show wounded, I won't show POWs, because that's
but
just
also,
my ethics.
so we all appreciate the information that you're providing with.
Yes, yes. But again, so what I'm trying to say though is I understand and respect Christopher's point of view that some of us may have general OSINT background, but we need to also inform ourselves about, more of the history than we already, than we may already know. We're never going to be masters of Ukrainian history here, that, but I mean, that I just want to understand. I want you to understand that I really do take this sincerely to heart. We're trying to do our best. We're probably going to do a lot more digging than you'd get on native.
basis, and sometimes it's slow. I'd love to be covering minute by minute things that are going on 24/7, but sometimes there's just a lack of information. Balance a group like this without that getting
Respond to something you said earlier, Osik, about
getting
on the to buzz
Grammar. Grammar, do you have something?
Sorry, my spawn was coming in here.
All good.
What was I going to say? Hold on a second. Brain work. Oh, I was just gonna comment that yeah, we try to be respectful of what's going on, and some of us have it's something that's kind of like in the back channel and stuff. Like we talk about it every once in a while, like trying to be sensitive to what's going on and the fact that there are people whose lives are being shattered right now. And then also trying to remember that as a group, we cannot please everyone. We cannot be the best communicator for every single person, but also there is a responsibility when, you know, like I don't think any of us necessarily planned on having, you know, like freaking US senators coming into our spaces or the director of who or just all of these people. But we've all kind of recognized like, oh, wait, there's a responsibility to try and use that for good.
yeah.
Then some of us just kind of like, you know, especially enlisted military background, it's like we start to shoot the shit or whatever, and it can seem like we're not taking it seriously. But we also know that if we don't take a second for a breather, we will run into the ground, and none of these spaces will be useful for anyone, least of all for what's happening in Ukraine and the world in general. But yeah, I mean, we do take it seriously for overall. It's just one of those things where it's kind of like you got to kind of
Yeah,
go with the flow.
Again, there's also, you know, we've noticed that there's shop talk. We have a back channel where we're saying, hey guys, you're getting off topic or whatever. We you know, we've heard from you over and over and over again. I keep on trying to police us when we get too far off track. O6 doing it. You know, we definitely we are all concerned about having it turn out to be too casual. I do want to recognize that we've had Rob here has joined the space. He hasn't raised his hand, but I want to recognize him as a speaker. And so go ahead, Rob. What brought you to the stage? Okay. Well, maybe Rob's still searching for the mic up button. He thinks he's on mute. So why
Can
don't
I
we have
just say something quick, Peter?
actually because we do have so many people with their hands raised, we should go around rather than popcorn style because we have a lot of people that want to speak. Let's all raise hands at this point. So I think beyond that, then we had Ezra and then Christopher, and then we'll go to Oscar, and then Mysterious yourself, and then if Rob finds his mic button, he can speak. So go ahead, Ezra.
Hi guys, I just wanted to respond to what Christopher was saying about people sort of thinking that it's a video game or, you know, something to just enjoy. I think there are people like that. Obviously, there's always going to be, but I think that the vast majority of people are just trying to process what's going on and you know, wrap their heads around it and talk to each other about it. So I kind of feel like it's not giving people enough credit. Most people are just trying to understand everything. And, you know, if they say the wrong thing sometimes, well, give them some credit, you know, cut them some slack.
Right.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Oscar.
Hey, thank you, Peter, for putting me up here. And I just want to share with you a little bit of information that I have, you know, regarding some stuff that is parallel to all of this horrible war that is happening in Ukraine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Awesome. Well, just like 30 seconds of background. I am originally from El Salvador, but I am a software engineer living in the United States for the last 15 years. I am a survivor of El Salvador Civil War. I mean, I've experienced shelling in front of my house, the guerrilla coming, performing a siege in my neighborhood, being 3 days under a table, having the mattresses in the windows. I've been through that. I was 7 years old when that happened. And I feel horrible for what is happening in the Ukraine is even more terrible than what I've experienced. I also have Ukrainian coworkers that live in the same state that I live. We work remotely, but we are in the same state. So yeah, like it's really sad. Like she was telling me that she has family in Kharkiv and that she lived for 4 years near the building that we saw being bombed a couple of days ago. So this topic is really like close to my heart. And aside of that, I've been working as a software engineer in several organizations in Washington, D.C., in a multilateral organization. I have a lot of, experience with banking also, and what I'm going to share with you is basically what's been happening with the sanctions and how I believe Russia and maybe some oligarchs or satellite organizations can be avoiding the sanctions. And it's basically with cryptocurrency, mostly with Tether and Bitcoin. And I want to do a little quick segue to my country after that. But basically, just today.
What do you mean? Explain more, Oscar, how this relates to Bitcoin and crypto.
Yes,
Explain.
sure. And also, I mean, this is going to be a segue to like a probable future danger that we want.
Actually, if I can back up, we're trying to be focused upon the OSINT here.
Okay,
cool. That's open source intelligence.
Excellent.
So hold on. So let me just set some ground rules then. I mean, you can certainly talk about the impact of, let's say, the depreciation of the ruble and how that may be destabilizing Russia, et cetera. But, we don't want this to be just, a commercial for crypto, right? So if you're going to make a point, I want you to get towards it and really make it germane specifically to what's going on right now.
Yeah.
As far as I know, I mean, other than, for instance, people selling NFTs that are either pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian propaganda, there's not been a whole lot of, impact of crypto directly on the conflict. Do you know of anything specifically related to this and how it is impacting, like, in the next, let's say, 48 hours or week?
So my point is, I'm gonna make it really easy. Basically, I saw the session at the UN the other day where 35 countries abstained from ratifying the resolution, asking Russia to get out of Ukraine and retire all of the troops. And one of the countries that didn't, voted, that abstained was El Salvador. And here is the segue, because basically in El Salvador, we have a figure that has become a dictator, right? Like, I don't know if you have like read the book from Ruth Diaz-Yat, a strongman. Bukele has been following all of the steps, by the book to become an authoritarian, and he has embraced Bitcoin and Tether. Now, here's the reason why he has aligned with China and Russia, and he is not going to be vocal about being against Russia. They haven't pronounced a word about this conflict in the Ukraine, and here is the reason for that. Basically, El Salvador is broke, and for that reason, they are now in association with Tether, and they just came up with this Bitcoin bond that's going to be financed by Tether. How is this tied to Russia and China. So here's the thing. In El Salvador, 10% of the national territory has been basically given to China on a list that's going to be decades long, maybe even 40, 50 years. China is now building a lot of ports and infrastructure works in El Salvador, and it's basically because they are detaching from the dependence of the IMF and the United States for development and all of that. And China is going to have the ability to have warships in the Pacific, coast of El Salvador. Is going to have the ability to fish within the maritime territory of El Salvador. That's going to be a grave danger for the United States if they put a military base, in there. They are already working on ports. They are also,
hold on. Wait, hold on just a sec. Okay, yes. I want to get back to this. I understand what you're saying, right? But each one of us from here, whether we're Americans or El Salvadoran, whether we're German or whatever, one thing that we really need to focus upon here again is OS int and the conflict in Ukraine. And if we spend too much time centering ourselves rather than this literal ongoing war, we're doing a disservice to the thousands of people who are logging in, listening to this stuff.
Sure.
So I hear what you're saying.
Just to finish my point.
Go ahead.
I think he's done.
I did too.
I was next, Peter. Just to respond to some of the stuff earlier about the actual conflict and stuff, and the origins of it with Putin and NATO specifically. I wanted to say that I think it was. I know some have suggested it was especially like more than 10 years ago. I mean, when I was still in elementary school, when people were suggesting that Russia be a part of NATO because the Warsaw Pact obviously ended. It was non-existent, and NATO was still there to counter a Soviet Union that didn't exist anymore and a Warsaw Pact that didn't exist anymore. But I think it's fair to say that when that didn't happen, when Russia obviously never became a part of NATO and was sort of otherized in the international community and sort of treated as though it's like a non-legitimate entity, I think it definitely otherized the Russian state and kind of led to a lot of the problems we see today as far as like, Vladimir Putin's MO, not only within Russia, but as far as the former Soviet states like Central Asia and Caucasia as well, and the foreign policy regarding those. So like I said, I don't think it's some sort of Soviet revanchism more than it is an anger at the otherization and the sort of unipolar nature of global politics since the end of the Soviet Union.
No, again, I was saying that he uses revanchism and irredentism. Like that's how he gets popular support. I don't think he necessarily believes it intrinsically, but like as a mafia don, he knows that he's got to get the people on his side, and so he'll use those, historic appeals to emotions and appeals to nostalgia. Like that's what he's doing it for. I maybe he believes it sincerely, but I really wonder whether he has anything other than a reptilian heart at this point. Go ahead. I think Osik, you had your hand up, and then we'll get to some of the rest of the speakers.
I just wanted to say I am kind of circling people in and out of speaker positions because there's so many people requesting. So if I do circle you out and you want to come back up, just request again.
Do you guys mind if I speak up?
We're not doing popcorn. We're raising hands. So
yeah, I think Olive wanted to go.
Yes. Hi, guys. My name is Olive. I am Russian. I was born in the New Russia. I live in the United States now, and I'm a former Russian citizen. So basically, I grew up in Russia. I was born in the 90s, and pretty much the only president I've ever known was Vladimir Putin. And I mean, I have a lot to say on his reasonings and everything. Obviously, I'm really sorry about what's going on. And I just want to say not all Russian people are terrible and not far from everyone supporting the war. It's just so devastating. I'm at loss of words what's going on. Well, in his official video, when he gives his reasons for the war to the Russian people, he says that defense is crucial and the enemy is not Ukraine, but NATO, in fact. So NATO, he says, like, are moving closer to our border and like we are in immediate danger, like I cannot reason with them, and like we have to defend our country by invading Ukraine, which is kind of, I don't know, has its logic and has its appeal to, I don't know, brainwashed population of the country. And so here he goes, but I don't believe that's the main reason, because Putin is a lunatic, he's crazy, but he's not that crazy. He's more strategic than anything. And I don't think the goal is to reunite former Soviet Union. I mean, far from it. I think he said, like a long time ago, that whoever misses Soviet Union, whoever does not miss Soviet Union has no heart. Whoever wants it back has no brain. That's his actual quote. I don't know how the hell I remember that, but it's true. So, and hey, like, yeah, defense is logical, right? It's like really hard to defend the borders, like if Ukraine is part of NATO. But it is so if you believe that NATO is actual enemy and is gonna invade Russia, which is like why, right? Like in our day and age, people like NATO would not just invade a country like Russia, especially. There is no reason for that at all, right? But it sounds like a real reason for the Russian population and some of the people in the world. I think the real reason of the war is resources, energy, like every other war there is, pretty much. Modern war, at least. So as we know, Russia is a petrostate, largest petrostate in Europe. And it is so unfortunately that is what our economy was based on historically, like just exporting natural resources we have. And with Putin's government, these 2 decades, he created a very toxic environment for any businesses to thrive. It's a true oligopoly, right? Like, and there is no just Nobel laureates in math and science, but how come there is no like world leading tech companies? I think that's exactly the reason, like government historically stifled that growth by really, yeah, I mean, he was popular at some point, I remember when I was a kid, but it sort of coincided with the growth of price for oil. So I don't
Yeah,
think.
can I respond to, because you're making a lot of points here, and I don't want to lose all of them.
Right.
You know, so let's just go back to a couple of things. First of all,
Okay.
there is a kind of a thriving Russian tech center. Like there's
That's
a lot
not
of
really
offshoring, right? Well, I mean, you have Yandex, you have Kaspersky, right? There are high tech companies in Russia.
But
You know, obviously,
Yandex is not a world leading tech company. It's a company that serves Russia, right?
right,
It's like a part of Ruski Mir. You know, it's
right.
not Google in any way. It's
Hmm.
like, yeah, right. This is just local. It kind of facilitates the work and operation of Russian state, in effect. Yeah,
Fair
there are
enough.
companies like that, and a lot of the times they are kind of the heads of them are usually people friendly to the regime.
Right. So, but then you were also talking about like common attitudes, and we were making this assertion. I want to see if this meets your experience also. It seems to me that there's like an older generation, people who do remember the Soviet Union. They
Right.
watch state-sponsored TV. You know,
All of it
they've
is.
exactly. But that's all that they know, right? Is that
Oh,
kind of
absolutely.
television and radio generation. And then it seems to me that there are many Russians, your generation,
Right.
that are on social media, they're creators, they want to be, and I was making the analogy that they're cosmopolitan, that they
Of
want to be
course.
in Paris, they want to be in New York, they want to
And
be
a
in
lot of
Milan.
us left. and a lot of us immigrated. There has been like a huge, massive brain drain for the past 15 years. Over 2 million young people of my generation left. Like, I remember whoever went to school, most of the people live abroad, everywhere in the world.
Now, is there any sort of communication back with family? Like, is there any sort of, like, you know, I don't, the other thing too, by the way, is somebody said, oh, you know, I have this person who's got connections back in Russia. And my major concern is, I said, wait a second, I don't want to hear what their relatives are doing necessarily, because will they be accused of spying? Like, you know, will there be, you know, will there be repercussions against them? So, you know, but I just want to know, are you in contact with your family back there? Are they okay? How are they feeling?
Yes. My mom called me a traitor today.
Really?
Yeah. So I did an art piece, sort of a protest piece. I burned my Russian passport in front of Russian consulate in New York in protest of the war.
Put that in front of, or on the nest real quick. Pin it at the top if you don't mind, Olive.
Yeah, sure. Hold on, let me figure it out how to do that. Yeah, and she just like emailed me to say that I betrayed the motherland, sort of. I'm like, okay, that's great to know. And unfortunately, I understand that, like, yeah, my family, part of my family has been brainwashed to the point of no return. Just like nothing I can do or say at this point. Like, I got canceled even with my family today, right? And all I did was the right thing. I don't believe in Putin's Russia. I love my country, but I don't see myself coming back, and it's just getting worse.
Yeah.
So
Olive, I would like you to stay up here as a speaker, and because you know we definitely want to hear more of your perspective. But let's cycle through some of the other speakers that we have here, okay? All right. Who else do we have next? Idiot Keys, go ahead. Oh, it's Carrie? Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Carrie.
Hi, good evening, all my friends. Olive, first to you. Your courage and bravery, really. It took a minute. I was like, where are you coming from? And then at the end, I just want to thank you for your authenticity a lot. And then Christopher or Christoph it spoke before you. And you're so right on so many levels. There are so many things about this that are confusing. And then prior to that, about the Bitcoin and the economy of this, yes, that could be a possibility. But I want us to think about this in the context of history, particularly economically, that China has the oldest, one of the oldest monetary funds. Bitcoin is brand new. Bitcoin is not going to hold a strong opinion here yet. There are other economic powers at play. We all need to ask ourselves that. I know, Peter, I sent you a text, and Osik, I did you too, because I was curious, because I don't know. I'm not an economic, person. I'm a philanthropist. I'm a humanitarian. I'm a 58-year-old mom in Indiana. And the thing I was curious about is, if we track the ruble, where did the war money go? Where did the war money get shorted? Where did it get longed? Who won? Who won in this today? Not at the end of the war, but today. The market shifted. So I know that's not what we talk about here, but it is a weapon of war. If you think about the powers of economy, they are political, they are time, they are geographical, and they are financial. So thank you for giving me a minute.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And, we can talk about the impact of the war on Russia's economy. Russia's economy, it was that Russian ruble used to be worth about 14 cents, and now it is literally less than a penny, right? So the Russian economy has just been utterly devastated by this war. One of the people apparently who had his money in Russian companies and investments was Assad of Syria. So a lot of Syrians I know are literally celebrating the fact that he's lost his fortune in this downturn. Obviously a lot of the Russian oligarchs have probably dispersed their riches. They probably have stuff in Tokyo and London and New York as much as they'd have it in Moscow. But as people may or may not know, the Moscow exchange had been halted and has been halted all week since the invasion. And as of this hour, I don't know the date that they're planning on opening it again because they keep canceling it pretty much day by day. So, but again, so their economy has already plunged to less than 1/14 or 1/15 of what it had been just about a week or so ago.
I wonder what that is financially, across the globe. But I think the point, and this is, the last thing I'll say, I always say that, but this is the last thing I'll say, is like when Venezuela crashed, because I'm a hunger and poverty advocate, I was working in that area at that time. There were people who really thought there was a purpose behind that crash. And we know there's purpose, greater purpose behind these wartime efforts and economic efforts. And I think we ought to all pay attention to our spidey senses. I think that's what I text you about, Peter. I'm sorry. Spidey senses. We need to pay attention to our spidey senses because we know what it is. When a car is crashing in front of us, we get a sense, to pause. Pay attention to our spidey senses. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sure enough, then. Okay, 88 Keys, I think you're next, and then Christopher will get back to you then.
Thank you, guys. Just like Olive, I am originally from Russia, from Moscow. Unlike Olive, we got out. We were part of the Jewish people trade for grain during Soviet time. So our Soviet passports were taken away by Soviets, and we became traders to the Soviet Union. Anyway, I'm in the United States for a long time. I have done consulting between U.S. Ukraine with Russians, and lots of other republics with a huge Russian populations. Putin obviously is using it now. Putin is focused, in my opinion, in recreating Soviet Union. The three horsemen of Soviet Union is Belarus and Ukraine. To the Moldova question, you had a speaker asking about it. Finland used to belong to Russia. If anything on a radar besides Ukraine is also Finland for Putin. Another thing I would like to make is this point. From a perspective of people that live in the Western world, in a sane world, I don't think it is possible to understand the insane asylum that Russia is. And the logic behind Putin moves, and he's not a singular entity. He has obviously a pyramid of people around him. It is hard to comprehend unless you're a part of this. And I appreciate the thoughts about it and speculations and what have you, but it's basically a sledgehammer tactics. Russian economy is in a horrible shape. It has been for 20 years. Well, it's always been. when I went back to Russia as an American citizen, I think it was 15 years, 16 years ago, to Moscow. That's where I'm from. I think the ruble exchange to a dollar was 23 to a dollar. Right now is what is quoted between 120, 180. And who knows what tomorrow will be. It's Putin. It's my take. I reserve the right to be incorrect. But one of the moves is to distract the people from the economy that is an incomplete toilet. And this patriotic will bring the Russian Empire back. Russia is this and Russia is that, is a distraction. And it's actually kind of hard to explain. It's totally insane.
See, so I want to be careful about words like insane, and here's why. Vladimir Putin may appear to us insane because we ourselves would not act as he is acting right now. But I had a friend, and his job was to analyze Muammar Gaddafi's mind. And he said, you can't look at it from your point of view. You have to understand that he has, to him, a completely, to him, rational logic for why he does what he does. And he said that, and in fact, there's a term for this, that if you are using your own reference, your own framework, your own ethics, your own morals, and you try and apply it to these other people, that's called a mirror imaging fallacy. This is what I would do, in that place. This is how I'd react. This is how I behave. That's mirror imaging, that somebody else believes and thinks you do. Vladimir Putin definitely has his own belief and his own system of behavior. So that was the one caution I'd say. So if you use the term insane, understand that it may appear that way, but again, other people, I think Olive was just saying, like, he's got this kind of cleverness to it, like he's making these calculated moves. It's not just random. It's not just, it appears bizarre only from our reference point of view, but he has a plan behind what he does.
No, you're absolutely correct. And I don't imply that this is driven by, when I say insane, it's an emotional statement. It is not what drives. What drives him is he's been spurned. Russia has been rejected by the West. And Russia feels all by itself. Okay? And his moves to rebuild the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire, it has his logic and his people logic. He does not operate in a vacuum. So when I say insane, it's just my emotions coming to the surface. I am not implying that he's insane.
Fair enough.
And this Russian nationalism and this bringing up the World War II, I am of a generation, which we'll give it away in a second. When I was a kid in Russia, my generation did not have grandfathers. I did not, no one had them because they were all killed in World War II. He is playing to all of that. And I do monitor, I still do some consulting, obviously nothing to do with Russians anymore, but I do advise. But if you monitor, for example, Russian propaganda TV, the 9th of May, which is the victory day of the World War II, and other days in between, they will play the movies constantly about the World War II. They've been driving this now for the last 5, 7, 10 years on a daily basis, trying to rekindle this one more time, that the world is against us and we have to be strong. We are strong. They're gonna come and get us one more time, and this is where we are. And apparently,
Sure.
lots of people are buying it.
Definitely. Okay. Let's go back to Christopher then. He's had his hand raised for a bit. Thank you.
Thanks, man. I just want to say, you actually, Peter, the last thing you had said, I was already going to kind of mention something, and you really led me in very well with that, which is basically contextualizing Putin's, actions against NATO. I think a lot of people, like you said, it's easy to look at what Putin's doing right now and what he's been doing since the annexation of Crimea, and even possibly further back as 2008, that war with Georgia, and say he's just a crazy madman trying to bring back the Soviet Union and take back all this land. But realistically speaking, it's actually very understandable to not want NATO at your doorstep, not want NATO at your border, if you're Russia. And we can obviously look at all the history of NATO and Russia before then, but I mean, when there's like missiles in Poland, for example, aimed at Russia, you definitely don't want that if you're the Russian president. And especially in the context of color revolutions, like Olive, you had said NATO wouldn't just go after anyone, but Peter, you mentioned a very important 20th century world leader, Muammar Gaddafi. There's a very famous video of him dying, actually getting killed by rebels, and apparently Putin, and he's talked about it before, but some have said Putin actually saw the video many times, and it really got into his head, and rightfully so, because he wouldn't want that to happen to him. And especially when you look at the color revolutions, like the Oranževaya Revolucija, Orange Revolution in Ukraine, the Rozovaya Revolucija in Georgia, and in Kyrgyzstan as well in 2005, and even recently in Alma-Ata, you had all these people dying and all this violence and protesting this year or just a few months ago. And so when you see those color revolutions, I think that's also a large part of Putin's fear, and actually why he did a lot of stuff early on in his presidency as far as gaining more centralized power, like the imposition of the federal districts in Russia, which actually had a really effective way of enabling the Russian president to keep a watchful eye on all the parts of Russia through sort of lackeys, for lack of a better term. And I mean, NATO, it's if you are the Russian president, NATO's not going to be your friend. And I think a lot of it just needs to be, I think people just need to understand that it's not so black and white as if it's a villain from some sort of cartoon who's just hell-bent on world domination, but rather a very practical sense of real
he's
politics.
definitely playing a kind of a chess game, but I think he definitely botched a lot of this. Because he saw the inaction of America after, for instance, Syria. All of the attacks in Syria didn't, we drew the sign of the land, and then we basically kind of towed it out of the sand ourselves. We couldn't even pass an authorization of the use of military force to stop literal weapons of mass destruction, right? You take a look at, let's say, Libya, and sure, Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown, but as soon as only four, think about the casualties that Putin is willing to commit upon his own forces for this offensive, right? Thousands of men have gone through the meat grinder. More Russian troops have. If I were to advance from Belarus, would they really risk it, a war with me, if just for the three Baltic states? Really? Because he's betting that the answer is no, that many NATO states would balk at defending other NATO allies. And we've talked about this extensively, even before the first shot was open, when we first were holding these spaces. We're like, what is NATO going to do? So that was his calculus, is that NATO didn't have a backbone, didn't have a spine, would not have responded like this. And in fact, until he really went over the border, many people did not believe that NATO was going to respond as it has. But it's not just NATO. Finland, historically neutral, Finlandization, right? Sweden, which had no military involvement since the time of Napoleon is getting involved. Switzerland, right? Again, also going back to the era of Napoleon, has tried to remain neutral in wars. They're getting involved. So it like he totally misjudged this situation.
You might have to be a little careful because I mean, a lot of that, like, for example, Finland, I wouldn't call it historically neutral because, for example, Putin's older brother died as an infant in the siege of Leningrad.
Since World War II, they've been neutral, right?
And so, like, I think and when it's a border country with Russia, again, it's understandable when Putin sees someone like Gaddafi or Yanukovych or the Rose Revolution, especially that one. That's, I mean, that had a lot of context for the Georgian War when they sacked Shevardnadze. Like they like it's very much understandable, I think, because I think a lot of people, for example, contextualizing it as well with the Iraq War and saying that more Russian troops have died in this so-called special operation special operation in Ukraine.
But let's call it a war, right?
Right. I mean, it's an invasion. Yeah.
Exactly.
And all the troops that have died, I think on the other side of that, though, a lot of people don't want to admit this, but I think there's like, it's going to sound a bit silly of a comparison on my end, but in the movie Shrek, that Lord Farquaad thing he says, some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make. I think a lot of people in NATO have looked at it like that. The ones they're sacrificing are Ukrainians. And it's when you see, like 10 years ago, John McCain, guys like that, who he's not alive anymore, but like a lot of these Western leaders really pushing the Ukrainians to try to fight Russia, saying, hey, Ukrainians, you need to be nationalists. You need to really fight the Russians, and kind of leading the Ukrainians on. And then when the Russians and the Ukrainians fight, they say, oh, Ukrainians, we're not going to defend you because you're actually not part of the club. You're not part of NATO. So you're on your own, even though we led you on.
Right. Well, this goes back to the security guarantees when the nuclear weapons were removed. That since that time, America has had a security obligation. And you're right. There's a whole lot of geopolitics involved with this. But let's not philosophize here. Let's get some of those other speakers in. Olive, why don't you chime in here?
Yeah, I wanted to say about the possible reasons. As I said before, I don't think recreating Soviet empire is just the goal. Like, what for? What for do you need all this land? Like, hey, that's what's happening with Crimea. It's a dry land, and it was supplied by the river flowing through a narrow canal through the mainland Ukraine. And when it was annexed, Ukrainians just cemented the river flow, and Crimea wasn't getting water at all. Like, there's a huge water crisis on the entire peninsula right now, and costs billions of dollars to supply water. So I think it's one of the targets, certainly, for sure, to free the peninsula from that water crisis and reduce the strain on the budget. And another big one, as I mentioned before, Russia is a petrostate. Because of the inefficient government, I'm not going to say it started with Putin, it started after privatization, right? It just so happened that wasn't done correctly. The transition from centrally planned economy to market economy never really happened the right way. And so a lot of resources, a lot of factors and assets of the country ended up in the hands of few. So, and those few, basically refused to lose that power. And the market in the Russia that is right now, it's a oligopoly, right? There's no competition. There's barely entrepreneurship or anything. So the country is heavily reliant on natural resources and the export. And, for example, oil, as we all know that, and gas that supplies almost the entire Europe. That's why you see these headlines that Europe was quite hesitant about like the sanctions, like they were sort of indecisive going back and forth. There is a huge reason for that. I'll come back to that later. And it's winter time, as we all know. So basically around 2012, it was discovered that Ukraine, in fact, has untapped oil and gas in its waters. Around the Black Sea and around regions like Luhansk and Donetsk, actually. And on the other side, that's another one. So if it is to be developed, Ukraine is going to be the second largest supplier of gas, natural gas. And so you can totally imagine that it's quite a direct competition to Russia. I mean, to tell you more, Shell and Exxon moved to Ukraine and studied development of those reservoirs. Why Ukraine didn't do it themselves? Because the country is pretty poor and they don't have enough resources, and it takes a lot of expertise, a lot of technology. So they sold the bits to Shell and Exxon, so they moved in. And then the conflict of 2014 happened, all of that, and they kind of pulled out because it was not safe to do business in that region. So it was also done on purpose. And I believe Putin just doesn't want that competition. He just does not want Ukraine to join NATO and sell bits to Western companies and develop those supplies because, yeah, they will be the sellers instead of Russia. And literally 70% of a Russian budget will be non-existent, in fact, and it's a big loss to the country's economy. Of course, it's a hypothetical situation, but the whole war feels very preventative. Because, as I said, the population is rapidly declining. There has been a huge wave of immigration. A lot of young people I know left. I mean, we weren't chased away, funny enough. We just voluntarily left. And yeah, the population is rapidly declining. So it's like now and never. I felt wintertime is also a very strategic choice. All in all, I think he'll want to take certain regions in Europe. Not Europe, not Europe. In Ukraine and just call it a day, in fact. And those regions are those rich in oil and gas. I think it's a war for resources, in fact. And of course, free the Crimea water supply.
Fair enough. Okay, Ryan, you're welcome back to the stage. We've had you on earlier this week. Why don't you tell us what brings you here tonight?
Hey guys, yeah. I first, I think, want to just say thanks to you, Peter, and OSIC, everybody in the open end community. I mean, Peter himself has just been tirelessly working away. And Peter and I have kind of been discussing behind the scenes, some interesting possible developments for the open end community. Anyway, yeah, I've just sort of been listening. I've been doing a lot of analysis over the past 3 days, and just on this topic of the state of Russia, the reasons for this war, the state of Vladimir Putin. I've been digging, especially the last 24 hours, to look at the other side. I've been analyzing and watching Russian state media. I've been reading RT. I've been looking at interviews with Russians on the streets of Russia. What do they think about this war? And there's quite a mixed response from Russians. Some of them believe in the idea that neo-Nazis are running Ukraine, which is the line that Vladimir Putin and Lavrov have really used consistently throughout this campaign. And it's a fantastical accusation. And I think this is where I start to struggle with, we can sit here and cherry pick all day long about, okay, well, they're going to get these resources from Ukraine and they're going to get this. So, and the other thing that they've discussed is nuclear weapons, the risk of Ukraine joining NATO and having a NATO country right next to them who could also have nuclear weapons installed. So I think that's a legitimate concern of Vladimir Putin, of Russia. I understand that. But to go into these other areas to say that neo-Nazis are running the Ukrainian government, and that's where you just start losing, I think, a lot of the world. And I think after today's little statement from Vladimir Putin, continuing with those types of statements, I think he's lost a lot of credibility with any leader in the international community. And so I think there's a lot of issues there. I don't think anybody believes that there's any legitimate reason for Russia to be going into Ukraine. And of course, the way that Russia is fighting this war is horrific. So is Putin crazy? What I've seen actually over the last up until the pandemic, I started to see Putin gaining attention of the West. I mean, he was certainly gaining my attention and people in my circles. He was doing a lot more interviews. He was doing interviews with American journalists that were very prominent. And, you know, he was gaining popularity in a way. He was becoming this kind of interesting figure for even for people from the West. And what's happened here is really unfortunate, is that I think everything that Vladimir Putin has worked for over the past 20 years, he's just completely exploded in his own face. And there's no turning back. There's no getting out of this. I know he can't just walk away and say, sorry, guys, sorry for disturbing you. We're going to stop this now. That's not going to happen. I think the way this is going to happen is there's going to be people who are going to cooperate within the Russian government, and this will all start to de-escalate at some point. But at this point, you know, it's hard to say what's going to happen next. But that's kind of what I wanted to chime in on. I also want to chime in on one other thing, which is, you know, the state of the Russian military. Now, we can see how well the Ukrainians have been defending themselves. And we've gone through lots of analysis. We've heard from lots of speakers. It's been great. Ukrainians have been doing a hell of a job defending their country against, you know, a prolific adversary like Russia. Russia on paper, if you look at their military on paper, well, it's in reality, it's not sinking. And, you know, I've talked to as many people as I could about the state of corruption within Russia and within the military. And all I keep hearing is that there's so much money that's wasted and stolen, and it never makes it to where it's supposed to go to produce things, to buy things, to get to places. So I looked up something, and it turns out in 2018, more than 2,800 Russian military officials were brought to justice for corruption. And it's looked at, according to some articles, as effectively one of the most corrupt entities in the world. So is it surprising that Russia maybe doesn't have the firepower that everybody thought they did? No, it's not. And I think this is going to be a huge problem for them. And I don't even think that Putin grasps maybe the magnitude of the results of this corruption over the past several years, which, you know, effectively erodes one's military. And finally, the budget of Russia's military is approximately $60 to $70 billion a year, which is only 8% of the United States' budget. And it's not, that is not a sustainable strategy either. So where do I see this going? I see this going through a slow de-escalation, and I just don't know how long that's going to take.
Yeah, I mean, we keep on getting asked about the nuclear possibilities and stuff like that. And right now, again, NATO is trying to do everything to deconflict that kind of situation. So I kind of agree that eventually there's going to be an equilibrium outcome that'll be less than what Putin wanted. Let's see, whose hand was up first? Was it 88 Keys? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I keep on hearing the term that Putin is playing chess. If you guys look at the circle of his closest advisors, he is not surrounded by smart people. His closest advisors are his former chef, his former bodyguard, and the people that he dragged out of St. Petersburg. These are not chess players. And that is one of the things that kind of really bothers me, where everybody puts Putin at some kind of chess grandmaster level. He himself, by the way, had a very mediocre KGB career. If you look it up, when he was in Eastern Germany, he was basically a meet and greet guy at meet German people, bring the Russians so they can go shopping. So this is not the most brilliant people on earth. Meanwhile, Russia, with all the money in the world from petrodollars, they are, any other corrupt country in the world doesn't even compare to the corruption in Russia. So meanwhile, for the 20 plus years, these people that came from St. Petersburg, been stealing the country blind. And they're still doing it, and they will be doing it tomorrow, and they're going to be doing it until they're out of power. I also want to I'm sure you guys are aware of this, but I'll just bring this up about Crimea. Crimea was essential from the get-go to Putin's plan. First of all, it gives them Black Sea, direct access. Secondly,
well, I mean, he has that from Krasnodar, right? But the ports there
Crimea,
aren't.
Not exactly though.
Right, but Crimea, first of all, the excuse was all along that Crimea was always part of Russia. The only time it was not a part of Russia is when Khrushchev in the early 60s, during Soviet time, by the way, Khrushchev was from Ukraine, gave it to Ukraine, which of course at that time it didn't matter. So the Russian people were all about Crimea rejoining Russia, and it was an easy sell for Putin because they always saw Crimea as part of Russia. But one other thing that
hold on, before we go too far into that, let me just give a mostly American audience a little bit of a background, or a global audience a background of this. So Crimea wasn't always part of Russia, right? There used to be an independent country there, the Crimean Tatars, right? This came out of the whole steppe horde period, the Mongols, etc. The Golden Horde was further to the east from them, right? And Moscow, the Principality of Moscow wasn't even near the Crimeans, right? But as the Muscovy grew and took over Novgorod, took over a whole bunch of these principalities and city-states across Russia, eventually came up across the Crimean Tatars, and before they attacked and took over any of the territories of Ukraine, they had taken over Crimea, right?
You're correct, but you're going as far as then we can say that Russia belongs to Mongolia.
Right, exactly.
Which it does.
So, I mean, this is going back to around the time that America was being colonized, right? In 1700s. That's the same kind of period, right?
No, that's way before that.
Or when specifically did Crimea become part of the Russian Empire?
I apologize. I would have to look it up for specifics. I don't have a specific date. I'm sorry.
Okay.
'83.
Okay.
Exactly. So this is after. Let's say the United States. Once the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was weakened, Russia filled in that gap and took over increasing territories away from this Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So that's where we get this kind of more modern sense of Ukraine, right? Mm-hmm. So, but again, this would be in the same kind of historical context as, let's say, the American Revolution, the War of 1812. Like these are not ancient history. This is not like 1,000 years of Moscow ruling Ukraine. And sometimes what happens is in this popular myth of Russia, they try and make it as this primordial homeland, which it never was.
That is
correct. It's about as old as the United States, basically.
Right. It actually worked itself backwards because Kiev, Ukraine, introduced Christianity to Russia.
Yes. In fact, that's totally correct, right? Because of the Orthodox Christian Church going through Bulgaria and then eventually into this area, yes, into Ukraine. And so all of the churches that are about a millennia or old, the 11th century, 12th century churches, yes, the heart of the Orthodox Church in this area is definitely here in Ukraine. In fact, you've seen this meme where like Moscow wasn't even settled at all. It was a forest at this time. Right?
Which is correct, yes.
Okay, I just want to cycle through some of the other speakers. I think, who is next then? Did Jonathan have his hand up next?
Yeah, I
Go
did,
ahead.
Speaker. I've been following this kind of conversation for a while, particularly surrounding the nuclear power plant that is in conflict right now in Ukraine. I think it's important to note that Chernobyl was captured by the Russians several weeks ago. I believe it was February 24th or 25th, in and around there.
Yeah, it was like the first and second day of the war, yeah.
Yeah, and I think in terms of modern warfare, it's important to think about media specifically in terms of a weapon. We see, historically, the use of force and the use of physical assaults onto foreign territory, but I very much tend to believe that Chernobyl, as well as the capture of this, or the advance towards this plant tonight, is stimulating a lot of conversation when it comes to world response or Western response. And I say that because now Putin more or less has a bargaining chip on his table with the fear of the world, with what Chernobyl was, back in 1986 when the disaster happened. Not saying that, the potential is there for, some sort of critical event to happen or anything of that sort of nature. But I think Putin is very much hoping that the West will look at these two nuclear power plants and say, whoa, okay, nuclear, not in the sense of warfare, but, I think that it lends credence to bargaining, and it's also important to note that the Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson said that the seizure of Chernobyl prevented Ukrainian nationalists from using the power plant to conduct a nuclear provocation, and that's what Russia are telling their people. Just a couple thoughts. I'm a civilian by trade. By no means am I an expert, but just my thoughts on the conflict happening in the ground tonight.
Sure, thanks a lot. Do you want to stay up here as a speaker? Do you have a follow-up question, or should we put you back down?
I'll stay for any follow-up questions.
Fair enough then. Okay, who is next? Was it Rob? Go ahead.
Peter.
We'll go Rob, Christopher, and then Rosalie, and then Ryan, I think.
Okay, great. Can you guys hear me okay? I was having a bit of trouble working out how to use my microphone.
We can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Excellent. Okay, I'm calling from Australia. My background is as an intelligence officer. Served 17 years in a number of different roles. And I'm particularly interested in the threads that you guys have got going in these spaces on the OSINT side of things, having done a significant amount of that overseas on operations, and having generally personally found it reactive and almost quicker than some of the more official chains at times. So yeah, thanks for bringing me up, Peter. It's good to be here. Hey, I'd really like to talk about some significant OSINT things rather than the geopolitical situation or
totally go for it.
The general history. I'm finding it very interesting, and I don't know why it is. Maybe it's because I've spent my entire career in a coin type environment, and everyone, all my training has been in training for near peer, and this is really the first near peer sort of operation that I've seen in my lifetime. So it's certainly affecting me more, and I've been pretty much glued to this for the last couple of months in the build up and so on. Certainly from a vehicle identification point of view, it's been very interesting. But I'm really interested in the indicators and warnings side of things from a Russian capability point of view. The weapon systems and the types of troops that we're seeing in the operating environment are of significant interest. You know, Oryx is doing his visual referencing of all of the vehicles that have been destroyed at this point, and his count is about 560. You know, a BTG of about 80 to 100 vehicles, you're looking therefore at a minimum of about 6 BTGs potentially destroyed, abandoned or captured over the last week. I find that a phenomenal amount, and I think you'd probably agree that because he's only looking at the visual side of things, it's probably underestimated quite considerably, but certainly not to the extent that's being reported by Ukrainian authorities. So, you know, you're looking at 500 to 600 vehicles at this point as a minimum. You know, that's the definition of decimation in terms of the amount of vehicles that have been that were originally posted on the border.
Right, and to be clear, for people who don't know their Latin, decimation means 1/10 of your force is gone.
Correct. And the key thing for me is that, you know, I've served in a couple of militaries, and, you know, we look at that and go, okay, that 10% is essentially combat ineffective. And if you're looking at a 30% F echelon versus a 70% A or B, so, you know, fighting echelon versus the logistic support that is required to keep those vehicles in the field and fighting, you know, you're really looking at the point where Russia will culminate. And I think if you look at an aggregate of the casualties across the UK, US, and Ukrainian figures that have been put out, you're probably looking again at around 5,000 would be a decent figure. And I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm not looking at this as a war game. This is people's lives that we're talking about. It's not that sort of thing. But if you're looking at it purely from an objective point of view, that again is substantial. Now, there's been a lot of debate about whether or not there is, you know, that who they're putting in, the types of troops they're putting at the front, and I don't think is a bad word. It's like hope is not a task verb, but I don't assess that Russia is so cynical that it would base its overall strategy on a walkover and therefore send its conscript troops at the very front. It's got to be a higher percentage of the contract troops versus conscript troops, and therefore you're looking at a significant loss of those higher trained elements. From an OSINT point of view, when you're looking at things like BMP-1s and Shilkas coming from the Eastern Military District at the moment, you know, those are obsolete 1970s and 1980s pieces of equipment, considerably more agricultural than your sort of BMP-3 or even a BMP-2. And then when you're seeing things like BMDs being used rather than in an air mobile operation or an airborne operation, but you're seeing them being used as mechanized infantry in a vanguard, you've got to look at it and go, that is replacing other heavier vehicles like BMP or even BTR. You know, a BMD has got 14 millimeters of armor that will barely protect you from a 7.62 round.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, here's the thing. You've been bringing up a lot of points, and I wanted to comment on each of them.
Sorry, Peter.
No, it's totally cool. But, okay, so let's just get to first of all, the force losses. As of today, it was declared that it's up to 9,000 losses that Russia has suffered. Now, what we did not get is a breakdown of KIA versus prisoners of war, you know, basically, you know, deserters, that kind of stuff. So we don't know the exact mix. And then, of course, like, you know, maybe wounded in action that were then taken back to hospitals, you know, as captives or something. Like, we don't know the exact breakdown of what does 9,000 losses mean. So we have to be very careful about that number. But from the number of killed in action that we heard earlier the week, or at least the claims of killed in action, that the deaths that were supposedly attributed to this conflict so far have already exceeded in a week all of the coalition losses in Iraq over the entirety of that mission. So Yeah, I mean, this is practically like World War II level losses, and it's definitely like meat grinder offenses. Like if you're willing to accept 10% losses per week to make your territorial objectives, then what you're telling your unit is, I don't care about your unit cohesion. I don't care about deserters. I don't care about the cost of materiel. The troops have definitely responded because even though we've seen a tremendous amount of equipment that's been destroyed, there have been some days when the pictures are about 50% abandoned vehicles and 50% like destroyed, et cetera. And when you think about it, if you were a retreating army and you were leaving behind abandoned equipment because you just couldn't bug out in time, that's one thing. But this is an offensive army that is abandoning equipment, which is a very different story entirely. So I wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I'm blown away by it. At the beginning of these, looking at these Twitter Spaces, and especially the ones you guys have been running for the last week, you had a lot of people going, they're not using tactics, they're not going by their playbook, they're not using doctrine. Well, that is correct. Essentially, you could say from a strategic point of view, they're using doctrine. They're using fires. They're using mass probing attacks. But they're failing, and they're reinforcing failure. But the tactical point of view, you're seeing these guys going through, villages, towns, and cities, non-dismounted. They're not even listening to their own playbook. Even if you look at the VDV tactics in the cities, they're completely rubbish, and I mean that from a having served in armies who have for decades looked at these guys as being the tip of the spear. Your first guards tank army, your shock armies, etc. These things that have been drilled into us is that this is where the fight will be one day, and you look at it and go, oh my God, their morale must be through the floor. Now, I don't agree with things like, they've been given a 2015 ration pack. I personally have eaten older food than that. And I'm pretty sure there's a couple of YouTube channels where there's a guy who eats stuff from the 1940s. But, that stuff will grind you down. The lack of food, the lack of fuel, the lack of comms is astounding. No encrypted comms in terms of who's talking to who. There's all you need is a line and a cut, and you're DF'd. Sorry, all you need is to be able to be, they can use direction finding to conduct defensive fires on your position if you're not using encrypted comms, or at least frequency hopping comms.
Right. So again, hold on, because you're bringing up a lot of great points, and I want to, first of all, I want to like level set people here who may not be in the mill speak. That's not the career, right? So everything you're saying is awesome, but let me just give an example of what you're saying about non-encrypted communications. People have been listening to Russian channels all week. People have been miking up in Russian channels all week. There is an aircraft that the U.S. Army runs called and we talked about this in a previous space today, the Beechcraft RC-12 Guardrail. And that was flying over Lithuania, just making nice figure 8 patterns all day long, listening to these totally open source channels. Like, they can just tune in and hear exactly what's happening. And the information that's coming out of it is just remarkable. Like we know that these troops are like out of fuel. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what, like they had a plan that was supposed to take them through, the total conquest of this country in 2 weeks. Now that plan has failed, nobody knows like who's in charge. It's a total Keystone Cops operation, and so we can hear this because there have been years of like all sorts of like embezzlement in Russian military procurement. So rather than getting encrypted radios, they ended up with like cheap, like things that you could buy on Amazon.com from China. So like it is, and as you were saying before, I wanted to touch this point. You talked about the vast oddness of like a few totally modern tanks and then tons of stuff that's practically 1970s, 1980s generation. Like there's no rhyme or reason, and it's not like they're putting only their worst units forward, because they totally committed like you say, these elite paratroopers, the VDV, they committed them, in the early days of the war, and lost entire units, right? So it's this mix of that there doesn't seem to be a pattern or a plan. They're just throwing everything to see what sticks at it.
It's reinforcing failure. It's like in the Battle of Kohima, whenever the Japanese general or the Japanese divisional commander was throwing wave after wave after wave, and the Air Force said, we can go bomb him, and Slim said, please don't, because somebody who might be competent might take over. I can't get over the incompetence of what we've seen. But what I wanted to touch on was, somebody mentioned earlier on the amphibious operation. My last role was as a J2 for an amphibious task group, and it is, without a doubt, in all my experience, the most complicated thing that you can plan. Forget an air mobile. I mean, an air mobile may be part of an amphibious operation, but an amphibious operation is ridiculously hard to plan. So many things can go wrong. So many stakeholders are involved. But the key things are, one, sea control, which they've got, and the other one is air superiority, which they don't have. And I can't understand why we haven't got to that point. But if you're looking at the likelihood of an amphibious, it's going to be either an amphibious raid, or it's going to be, to form a beachhead. But I can't see the reason to form a beachhead when you've got, solid, secure lines of communication via land from Crimea. But an amphibious raid, which would take and potentially hold the port of Odessa, it is going to be complete carnage. And I have a feeling that if they don't get it right, and I would say it's almost certain that they won't get it right, that is probably going to be the last gasp in terms of any sort of strategic goal within Ukraine. I feel that the Rapucha class, the alligators, that whatever they're going to put onto the beach, when they land on the beach, they're going to get hit by MLRS, by javelins, by whatever it is. It doesn't even matter. Some of the anti-tank mines that are on the beach, they will stall and they will be destroyed. And then you're looking at, it's, in my mind, I think it's the first opposed keen to hear your thoughts on that, Peter.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I actually spent quite a bit of the night last night strategizing with somebody else about what Ukraine could do in relation to an amphibious landing at the port of Odessa.
I also do just want to say, make sure when we talk about Ukraine, we do have to make sure what we say, just out of keeping them secure as far as
absolutely. I'm totally with you on that. I'm not gonna get into too many details.
Okay, I just wanted to point that out before you started.
Yeah, no, I get it, and I don't want to do that either. Yeah, I think an amphibious landing, the long story short is that I think an amphibious landing will be very challenging for the reasons that have already been mentioned and a whole lot more. The funny thing is last night I had said, sea mines are, a great thing. And I woke up this morning and I saw that there was a ship, part of that cluster, that was sunk by a sea mine. I don't know the veracity of that information. But
yeah, so let's just go over that incident in particular, because I think that's a prelude.
Because I'd like to get more clarity on that, Peter.
So let's just go through one of the things that's happened. So since this war began, the first day of the war, you had the Yasa Jupiter was hit, then the Namura Queen, the Millennial Spirit, the Banglar Samriti, and then today there is the MV Health. I believe the MV Health is the first one that totally sunk. But there has been these like clear times when the Russian Navy has shelled or missiled these ships and they're all neutral countries. None of these are flagged by Ukraine. None of them are Ukrainian owned. All of these are like Turkish owned or Japanese owned or Moldovan flagged, or registered in Bangladesh. And so today this ship happened to have been Estonian, and it was Panama flagged, and it was the MV Help. It was reported that it hit a mine and sank. But the question I have then is what happened to the crew? How did it hit a mine? Like I don't have the specifics. So if anybody has more details on this, definitely want to know, but that's very suspicious. Then the question is, if it's a mine, were those mines put out there by the Ukrainian Navy or by the Russian Navy? Because as far as I know, Ukraine doesn't have any mine layers left, but the Russians do. So that's as far as I'm situationally aware. So if anybody has more details, please go ahead and speak.
Yeah, the only thing, Peter, the only other thing I can add to that I got was that there was one sailor that was killed on that ship and 3 others injured. But other than that, I don't know anything else.
Yeah. So now I have heard rumors, and of course, when I say a rumor, I do not want anybody to take it as truth or as false. It is just an unknown claim. But somebody claimed that the Russians had boarded that ship and were trying to get into Odessa harbor using that ship to see if it was mined. Now, again, there's all sorts of fog of war stuff. There's all sorts of stories that spring up. So I want you to take that with not just a grain of salt, but an entire salt mine. Okay. But again, this is the kind of stuff that we're looking for proof. So again, if somebody does have some more details, please don't just DM me. By the way, please tag me publicly if it's a public source.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add one other thing, and if anybody else wants to add to the ships, that would be great to get any kind of update on it. Because so what was just brought up before was about the owning the sky and the number of fighter jets that Russia has, particularly installed waiting in Belarus and at some of their own airfields. I think Russia has 2 problems, and I've kept seeing this through various different information sources from different people. There could be a lack of guided missiles and also a lack of pilots, and I don't think there's any other explanation for it at this point.
Now, we do know that there were Russian jets that did strike a nearby ammo depot near Odessa, and so they were buzzing that. I saw some typical bomb blasts, but oftentimes what we've been seeing with these kind of attacks on armories and arms depots is we see like a primary blast followed by a huge explosion once the rest of the stuff gets hit. I did not see sufficient video evidence that there was that kind of secondary blast, which meant that it took out the whole depot. But I know that they were trying to pound those positions today. As far as air superiority goes, I've seen Russian air assets in the south, but it's not like we've seen the more active defense over the capital. So because they're numerically outnumbered, I do I believe that the Ukrainian defenders are trying to pick their battles. They can't be everywhere over the skies. They're not dominant. But at the same time, I don't think that Russia is being very lazy, and to a degree, you got to be a history geek like me, but reminds me more of Graziani rolling over the Libyan frontier and then sitting with 250,000 troops before, because he just wasn't, he couldn't get to Alexandria. It's really reminding me of that, of like an army that just didn't have its logistics figured out, and then it basically is getting bogged down in its own logistical tale. So that to me seems like what's going on here, but they're not really using all their forces. They don't seem to be able to do so. For the advance on Mykolaiv, this is in the south, coming out of Crimea, it looks like what happened is that in this southern advance, striking towards Odessa, the Russians crossed the Dnieper further upstream from Kherson. They bypassed Kherson that whole first day. They didn't even try and go into the city, which was, by the way, lightly defended. It's not like there was a very strong defense mounted for the city, but they bypassed and they kept on just driving up the road to see how far they can get in a single day, like a blitzkrieg. They got as far as Mykolaiv, but then what had happened is that behind them, what they didn't realize was that um, Ukrainian defenders started attacking the crossing that they had used to get over the Dnieper. And so they couldn't bring up the fuel trucks to refuel them. And so they literally just drove to where their gas ran out and then started abandoning vehicles. That's what I understand on the first day or so of conflict. They then needed to turn back around. And then again, they had this kind of assault over the last few days where they reduced the defenses of Kherson and then eventually took the city. So now it's basically like Russia's trying to get its momentum back up for that southern offensive. But they did make some significant territorial gains. But what people have been noticing is that these are very thin gains. They're sticking to the highways. They're not. It's not like a front. You can't think of this like a World War II front. It's like they're just taking a highway and shoving as many vehicles as they can up that highway as possible, even if they cause themselves a traffic jam. Okay, and I wanted to circle back then because you were talking about the potential of attack on Odessa. We've all believed that that is the target, but the question would be, would you go after a city of 1 million population immediately, or would you land, like further up or down the coast in order to do this kind of thing? So I just want to put in people's heads, we don't know where, if or where a Russian troop landing would be. Osik, go ahead, please.
So, Muddy sent me a DM. He DM'd me specifically about the Odessa thing, actually, before we started talking about it. But he said he might have some info from experience.
Yeah, I can't raise my hand for some reason, but if you guys don't mind. So I'm in the Navy, and I've got a little bit of experience with like waterborne assaults and dealing with stuff of that nature. And the big thing I think we're seeing with Odessa is, one, I don't think they're going to hit Odessa directly. Personally, we would come along the flanks. And two, one of the big things I think we're looking at with the Odessa situation is, one, the weather. People were talking about the weather earlier. Weather's not an issue. I was looking at sea states, and I was doing the same kind of research I would do if I was planning an op or going to be doing stuff with as a coxswain. And sea state's only about 3 feet. That's not an issue for them. They're going to easily be able to handle 3 feet of sea state. What I think's going on is they're probably having the same issues they're seeing on land. And most likely, a lot of that equipment they pulled out on those landing craft are probably having malfunctions, probably having fuel lines rot, and naval infantry is probably second guessing whether or not they want to actually land. Because if they're having even a tenth of the issues that the guys on the ground are having, they are going to have a slog and a half of trying to get any equipment on the deck. And if they do get on the deck, they're going to get slaughtered.
No, definitely. Thanks for that perspective. Okay, Christopher, you had your hand up for a long while. Let's get you into the mix. What do you want to say?
I was just gonna say, I was hoping someone would have mentioned it at some point because I didn't want to just keep throwing stuff out there. But the Minsk agreements, not a whole lot of talk about those I've seen lately. I mean, those should have been like, I think no one's talking about like the violations of the protocols of those agreements with Russia and Ukraine, because I mean, there's a full war going on, and the first fighting was going on in the east with Lugansk and Donetsk, and I mean, there was supposed to be a ceasefire, and it got violated, and even now we see all this fighting, and everyone's throwing all the options of diplomacy off the table and acting as though the only option's war. And I think the main point to make is just like, there needs to be I think people need to stop with the idea that this should only end in a total victory for either side. because a total victory for Ukraine would, or at least NATO in this sense, I think it would entail a total devastation for Russia, and a total victory for Russia and Putin specifically would be like absolute devastation of
I wouldn't
Ukraine.
jump to that.
Please go ahead.
I wouldn't jump to that. I mean, I think a victory in Ukraine's sense is just getting all of their land in addition to Crimea back. That's what they're saying publicly.
Yeah, I mean, hold on, let me jump into this too. I think the other thing too is that already Western, the concerns in the West is that Russia has already ruined its economy. That used to be able to get, what is it, 14 cents on the dollar, 14, like a ruble is worth 14 cents. It's now worth less than a penny. Russia has already wrecked its economy. I personally have described it as a corpse that's still walking. It just doesn't realize it's dead yet. And I think that this is very concerning to the world because we don't want to have a global collapse. We don't want a new global depression, which is definitely what could happen if Russia is reduced, economically. So I think that this is going to be very concerning. Do you want to chime in on this specific point?
Yeah, I have a different opinion on that. I feel like Russian economy, it's always been bad, truth is, and it's pretty self-sustainable, in fact, right? Like the country, in a strange way, can exist on its own. I mean, Putin believes he'll still be able to export oil and gas, and yeah, I mean, country has everything: resources, agriculture, some sort of industrial complex. As you said, there were some kind of Silicon Alley right there. It's to serve the interests of the country. Like, he was preparing for that. I mean, he's learned from the sanctions before of 2014, and like he knew what was coming. It's like I feel like he felt like it's gonna be a quick war, like before, just like take what I need and just go away. Yeah, there'll be sanctions, but I'm better prepared. Like, I have my war chest ready. I feel like he's been prepared, and like Russian people's lives will be worse, but I feel like that's been a historical precedent. Like, Russians' lives, ordinary people's lives, were always pretty terrible, and Russians don't even expect anything more than that. Unfortunately, that historically, if you look back to Soviet Union times, early 90s, it was bad. It's really, really bad. I remember early 90s, like even like, yeah, early 2000s. Wasn't a great time. There were like a lot of poverty. And I feel like Putin's intent be like, oh, okay, like citizens of my country don't care. We're self-sustainable. I don't care of the consequences, really. I'm not doing that much of trade with the world, really. That's my take on that.
I would say to
All right, thanks.
Osik said, you brought up a good point though about Crimea, but I have to say it doesn't seem true to me because it's like that German Navy admiral who actually resigned from his position in like late January, because he had been talking about the state of Russia, Ukraine, and he kind of said what I think are some truths that are like just too hard for a lot of Western leaders to accept, which is he said basically that Ukraine's never going to get Crimea back, and that they need to just give. And this is a very crude way of wording it, but he basically said that to give Putin the respect he deserves, and that's all he wants is to be given a seat at the international table. And I think a good example of this is not with Russia, but like I think it was 2018 or 2017 when North Korea and the United States had a meeting. It was the president of the U.S. and North Korean supreme leader. That's the craziest thing to think about. But I think a lot of what you say, for example, Kim Jong-un doing crazy things with like rockets and stuff, it seems like a lot of what solved that was putting him at the international seat, having
But if you want to see at the table, you don't shoot the person who's sitting in a seat.
Right, but I mean, you could also argue the same for Ukraine with the shelling of Donetsk and Lugansk after the Minsk agreements because they were forced to stay there.
Okay, there have been I have followed this since that time, right? There have been artillery duels back and forth. Much of it is instigated by the so-called separatists, and their Russian, handlers. Like, and these are not insignificant numbers. If you just take a look, we talk about the number of dead in this war right now. What is it? It's 14,000, 16,000. That has been a low intensity conflict, and it is clearly instigated by Russia. It's not like the Ukrainians want to shield their own people.
I mean, what would you make of the?
There has been systemic rape across the Donbass. Hold on, please, hold on. There's been systemic rapes and sexual assaults throughout Donbass to drive people who are Ukrainian speakers to leave that territory, to make it so disgusting, so intolerable that you want to leave it for the Russian nationalists. And when people have tried to get this investigated, the Ukrainian government can't respond because they don't control the territory. And then when women bring these to the so-called local governments, they're laughed out. So, and I know that rape goes both ways, that there have been atrocities in that war in both directions. It is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing, and that gets very much back to like the kind of conflicts that you saw in the Balkans. It is a dirty war, and there are very few clean hands in it. But it began because Russia wanted to foment dissent and to really, prevent Ukraine from ever being able to get NATO accession, because they clearly wanted that after 2014. But then Crimea and Donbass both make it so that their territorial integrity is, at risk. And that's one of the blockers for NATO accession. So, I don't want to have any revisionism on this one.
But the diplomacy thing does certainly matter, because, I mean, you did bring up a very, very good point, I think, which is if you want a seat at the international table, you don't shoot the guy who's on the other side of the table, right? But that's exactly what they do with Zakharchenko in 2018, after 4 years of him being in his position. I mean, what would you make of that when he was just in a cafe and then he was killed for his for what his position was?
Again, this is a dirty, dirty, nasty war, like the Balkans wars. And the thing is that because these are nasty, dirty, internecine, neighbor versus neighbor kind of wars. The same, by the way, I'm Irish by heritage. Do you think the Irish don't know about dirty wars and shooting each other at the cafe, right? Like the Troubles. It reminds me very much of that.
Well, it's a lot more one-sided, if that's the argument to be made, because it's not really so much shooting at each other, but the head of this separatist republic, Donetsk, Alexander Zakharchenko, he's
all of that does not excuse a full-on mobilized, force-on-force, third-generational war with 250,000 troops.
No, I agree.
The murder of one human being does not allow Vladimir Putin. And by the way, guys, this is not a place for Russian apologia. If you want to have a space like that, I'm going to ask you to make your own room. We have to be very careful. We do.
Kill Russians, and they killed 14,000 people, Russians. So that what Russian people were fed continuously, that's the official version. I don't know, I felt like I'll just like tell you that. I mean, of course it's not true. I mean, those wars were like sponsored as like, oh, it was dirty, you're right, it was fucked up conflicts. Really, it's the same playbook with that's Crimea, in fact, if you think about that. Same propaganda, same pro-Russians, wanna get reunited with Russia and all of that. It's a dirty war where both sides, all sides, are pretty disinformed at this point.
Thanks very much. Hey, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. First off, I'm not sure if people are aware or not, but news is coming out that the nuclear power plant that was shelled earlier is now actually secured completely, so there's no direct threat there, which is good news. But it's going back a little bit to what someone said earlier, and I've messaged Peter on this, and if you look at history in Hollywood movies and stuff, you'll have some movies where the might have the Russian military, the old Iron Curtain, super force of Russia. Putin, it feels like Putin is firmly behind that old school Iron Curtain, bring back the USSR feel. And, he's trying to display this in a show of power against Ukraine for whatever reason, whether that be resources, whether it be for rebuilding the USSR. But it's clearly showing that you would think, a country of that magnitude and the might and the power what Putin has is that he would have that same might and power within his military. And it's clearly, being shown that he doesn't. There's outdated gear, there's outdated tech, there's outdated comms. He's put a significant amount of his armed forces into this invasion, this liberation of Ukraine, whatever you want to call it. And it's clearly not working in the way that he planned. And if anything, I think it's showing the world that Russia, as much as he uses this aggressive force, like saying, he's going to put his nuclear battalions on standby, I think it actually shows that the military and Putin are actually quite vulnerable, and the only direct threat that he's given is nuclear weapons. I'd just like people's thought on that, really.
Okay, let's see whose hand was up. Ryan, I know your hand's been up maybe a little bit longer, but Randy's new to the stage. I'm going to let him go just before you, okay? Go ahead, Randy.
Hi, thanks for bringing me up. My background is electronic warfare, but I can get into some of we were talking earlier about encrypted comms, but before that, I'd like to bring up the Russian logistics problems. And from my view, looking at Russian military history, they've never fought a war more than 100 to 200 miles away from a railhead. They're a rail-based military. They support everything by rail. Even in Afghanistan, they had rail links from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan to support their forces. And when they invaded Ukraine, they had not yet established a railhead within Ukraine from which to resupply, and that's what's causing primarily their logistical problems. And on the encrypted comms theory, I think one of the reasons they're not using the encrypted comms is not because they don't have them, because they do. I think one of the reasons is it wouldn't bring them much more benefit. They don't want them to be collected on more than anything else. The Ukrainians are not using directed counterfires, so it doesn't really help them. The OSINT community is collecting on them all day, but are the Ukrainians really using Russian comms to any tactical benefit from their point of view?
Yeah, from what we've heard, for instance, Ukrainian soldiers will mic up in Russian channels and tell them, like, "Hey, you want to speak to your buddy? We've caught him." Well, like they've been very chatty with the Russians on their own channels. There was somebody who put up oinking swine like for hours. Just so the Ukrainian military definitely knows that Russia is not very secure, and they're taking advantage of that. You can bet it.
In that capacity, like in an information warfare capacity, yes, but when the Russian military is planning this out, they're probably more thinking of directed counterfires based on comms, and they're also aware that NATO and all the NATO countries basically have every ISR collector flying right now during their operation, and they just don't want to be collected on, and they see that as a trade-off. They don't see the benefit of using them versus the loss they're getting.
Yeah. I think the other thing, though, is, and Osik and I have talked about this, there may be some things we also know that, like, even if we know it, we wouldn't want to say because there are methods that we want the Ukrainian defenders to be able to maintain. So, so we can speculate, the kinds of things that you could do if you were listening in on your opponent. Obvious, like you're saying, there are definitely, U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force assets that are going up with SIGINT capabilities, signal intelligence capabilities, and we have these agreements to provide all of the information that our forces are gathering to them. So, there are definitely there's a lot, though, in terms of operational security that's just not happening like you'd normally have it from the Russians.
I think that goes back to something I was saying earlier about where they have inferior communications and inferior weaponry. You would think such a big country like Russia would have first-grade military, hardware to use in an invasion. And it's clearly being shown over the past week or so that they don't have that capability of, an effective invasion force, which only serves Ukraine better. It's with what you were saying about, the Ukrainians letting Russian prisoners, POWs, let them phone their mums and all this and everything. I would say it's quite embarrassing for the Russian side that they are showing how inferior they are to the world when they put up this show of strength, which obviously is not working. The only way that Russia is winning this war at the moment is with information warfare online.
I would agree with that, and I would say that it's an absolute, on the Russian side, a failure that Ukraine still has working cell phone and internet networks to get all this information out.
Exactly. You'd think that would be the first thing that they would strike at.
Right, the old-fashioned, juntas that, like, the first thing you do is you take the radio and TV station, right? They're not doing even those kind of basics.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, Randy, you were speaking.
No, you made my point. So.
All right, let's go to Ryan then. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good points, guys. I think the other thing about this too is that we see some questionable equipment on the Russian side, but it's like I served in the military as well, and like some people in here, I have some experience. It's not just the equipment; it's the person behind the equipment. I mean, I can give the best gun, the best night vision to my grandmother, and it's just not going to be used, right? So the training for each individual person is just so important. And we've heard from, we had a Canadian commander that was talking about training the Ukrainians. She was there last year. They even got to the point in terms of the modernization of the Ukraine's military in terms of gender or just, you know, battalions that are surrendering. So that much is clear. I do want to bring one thing up here, and I don't think this gets enough coverage. I know this is brought up in the OSINT communities a little bit. So the International Criminal Court they are at this point investigating war crimes in Ukraine. And I want to make two key points about this, because I think there's been maybe a little misinformation about this. And I know there's issues with the International Criminal Court, and we can criticize it. However, 39 countries that are signed on, or sorry, the probe is starting after 39 countries that are parties to the Rome Statute that established the court, including Canada and France, have petitioned the International Criminal Court to begin an investigation. And here's the important thing. The International Criminal Court claims that they have jurisdiction over Ukraine because the Ukrainian government accepted the ICC's mandate in 2015, despite the country initially not being a party to the Rome Statute. So I'm sure we're going to have all kinds of politics around this, but this is very interesting, and this is happening right now. So I think there's going to be some very interesting developments about this, and you know, the path to establishing war crimes, and then everything that happens after that, potentially regime changes as a pretext for that.
Hey, before we go into the other speakers, hey, Osik, I wanted to check with you. Are you seeing anything in terms of the advance going into the Zhytomyr Oblast?
Yeah, I did. Aaron, do you have any update just about on the ground?
Not right yet. I'm waiting to hear some more. I was in the other space and I was looking at just at different areas. One thing I wanted to point out is I'm hoping to get some new updates soon here. I'm like you guys. One.
Did we lose him?
He still shows us here, but his mic is muted.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, I'm Aaron Boma. I'm one of the regular speakers, military analyst for Carleton County, historian, Woodstock, New Brunswick, Canada. So the situation, I'm not hearing much on the ground right now. I've been looking around. It's kind of slow tonight, at least from right now, what I have seen. But what the biggest, we're talking about the biggest advantage that Russia has right now. Their biggest damage advantage, of course, is their indirect artillery, and that's at least unfortunately been one of their biggest helps is their heavy bombardment by air and by Grad rocket launchers. Grad strikes on Kharkiv and in Kyiv, but the problem is that their doctrine is absolutely, their doctrine has been absolutely garbage, and so I think that the problem is that even if Belarus goes into this, right, it's kind of like the Italians and the Germans. The Belarusians are playing Mussolini here, and then they're going in with lighter skinned vehicles, and then they're probably going to get just as much or probably more damage. So that's good for Ukraine as long as we keep up the supply line. One update actually from Canada today, from my home country, and I'm glad that they're doing what they're able to do, is 4,500 M72 Law light anti-tank rockets, which are unguided rockets. Today they'd be more used for bunkers or different aspects. They're used for lighter skinned vehicles now because main battle tanks they probably would have to use 4 or 6 depending on where you'd hit with them. But they are 66 millimeter, and what they're able to do is, these things could be used, for lighter skinned vehicles. And this 4,500 of them are being sent from Canada to Ukraine today, and that's some of the biggest announcements from Canada. Now, so I've touched on a few points there. I'm hoping to get some more info soon on the reactor or the power plant, and then so that's just some of the updates from me from
Aaron,
home.
did you mention the hand grenades as well that Canada's sending?
Oh, are we sending C-13s?
I believe we are.
Awesome. Okay, that's good. I didn't see that part. I skimmed through it, and I think I might have been on the way somewhere. But okay, that's good news. So that's even better. I just yeah.
With
Thanks.
regard to the power plant is now secured.
Good. Okay, that's what because and then my phone died and I had to charge. Okay, thanks guys. Awesome.
Also, to clarify, when we say secured, the power plant is secured by Russian forces. The Ukrainian operators are still there. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I'm still trying to find that out. The power plant itself, it's still got operators, but I'm not sure on what side it's actually secured by, whether it be Ukrainian or Russian.
It would be Russian, because when Chernobyl was overtaken, there were still Ukrainian workers running the plant and watching the security cameras and doing their day-to-day task. And to this day, the Ukrainians are still there at Chernobyl, making their security rounds and doing what they usually do. The verbiage that was used was it's nuclear secure. So that was the secure thing that was mentioned.
Fair
Peter,
enough. Hey,
what was that specific question that you asked me?
Okay, so the question I was asking is that, okay, so in the past 24, 48 hours, we've seen things like, for instance, all the traffic lights around Pinsk in Belarus, just all the traffic lights just happen to turn off, and not the traffic lights, the traffic cameras, right? So there was, you couldn't follow the cameras like we did in, other parts of this conflict. They just all turned off. And then today, there's reports from a couple of folks that Russian forces are trying to open up a new line of advance towards the Zhytomyr Oblast, which is west of Kyiv, more towards like the Lviv area. So if that is a new axis of advance, I'd be very interested in finding out. Now, just for people who aren't familiar with that area, that gets into what's known as the Pripyat marshes. It was historically a very difficult place to make a mechanized advance through. So I was, and there's not very good roads. These are not like your best highways that are going through this whole area. So if you just take a look south of Pinsk into the frontier between Belarus nations, I've been searching on the various towns along the border. Concentrations of vehicles, but we just haven't seen anything, happening on the ground as far as we know.
Yeah,
I'm gonna look into that and see if I can find anything.
Sorry.
Right. The threat for people to understand is that this would be a direct kind of movement towards the supply lines that have been coming through Poland towards Kyiv. And so obviously they'd be trying to cut off any sort of Western involvement in the country if they could secure, like a drive straight on through to, let's say, like the Moldovan border or something like that. But so far, no proof of any of this, but it's the kind of thing, you want to keep your radar up on. We have a man. The man has no name. Why don't you take the mic, sir?
Good evening, everyone. I hope everybody's doing okay. I'm still working. I served as an XO for quite a few years, and I'm an engineering director now, so I work in the utility sector. And I've worked with the Ukrainian folks quite extensively in the last few years. But one of the things I do want to mention from my time as an XO is that I'm noticing that there was a lot of pilfering done in regards to preventive maintenance, and that is one of the main reasons. I know some folks mentioned it earlier, but basic maintenance in any military vehicle can either make you or break you, especially as Ryan was talking and the other gentleman was talking as well about per every mile you have to have, for every time you know, for an piece of equipment, you have to have sometimes 3 or 4 personnel for support. And what I'm seeing is a lack. I mean, somebody has pocketed a lot of basic maintenance monies, and not just maintenance, but upkeep. And one of the other things that I've noticed is, I'm not sure if even the folks that are working on the equipment on the Russian, which I'm starting to think this is a pervasive throughout, not just them, not just Russia, but a lot of folks that I've worked with in other countries. Maintenance is always, operational cost is always there's no added benefit immediately, but it's an added benefit when in operation. You you don't notice it. Logistics. Folks that have, it's the thankless job from what I've always heard. Folks, nobody cares about logistics until you need logistics, and I think this is not new, like someone was saying, and none of the lessons from either Hitler were learned, or Napoleon, or the Finnish invasion when they invaded Finland in 1939. None of the lessons in basic military maneuvering. And yes, you could have on paper, 1,500 tanks, but if you've not done maintenance on 50% of your force, or done it even correctly in at least 30%, you don't really have a combat effective unit, or army, or division, or expeditionary force, or anything of that matter. So, there is a wanton display here of unprofessional behavior with SIGINT, with basic operational things that are basic in any Western. And and I know I'm going to change gears on the operational aspects, but I'm going to change gears into a conversation that happened earlier. This has nothing to do with NATO. Whoever brings this up as NATO, as an issue of NATO, no. All you have to listen to the man in 1996, in 1999, in 2004, in 2000. He's been projecting this conversation of what it is. And you do not invade a country. If you have an issue with NATO, you do not invade a country that borders 4 NATO countries. So with that being said, you right away, it's like, I have a problem with my neighbor's, wall. So I'm going to build I'm going to have an issue right here, and I'm going to make it more prevalent. So it has never been about NATO, because now you are on the border of NATO, and now you have Poland, and now you have other countries that are bordering Ukraine. So you have a very big problem when you do want to say that it's a NATO issue, and you want to state the fact that it is an encroachment. No, the man has told you exactly why in 2007. It is a matter of what he thinks is the greatest tragedy of the 21st century, which is the collapse of the Soviet Union. He also sees himself as a Tsar. He also sees himself as restoring the 28, I think there's 28 Federation of Russian republics right now, and he wants to bring it back to the numbers it was before 1991. It is a simple fact of that, and it is not stopping at Ukraine. He is not stopping. I mean, he already gave threat to Sweden and Finland. Hadn't done it forever. Why do it now? Because now he feels trapped. And there's a lot of situations here where now ego comes into play. And you could say, that, oh, he's a madman. No, he's not. He is calculating because he either attacks on the outside or he gets attacked from within. And the only way you do that, every dictator has done it, is you create an external circumstance to make sure you rally the troops around you. And that's what he's done here. This was a survival situation for him because, as you've all stated, the economy is crap, you know. And I'm gonna just make this one last statement. I'll take, give back, and then I'll listen for any questions that someone may have. But when you look at the totality of all the things he's done, every objective that he would have had prior to this, he's actually gotten. It's been opposite day. NATO is more united than ever. The European Union is more united than ever. And now you have the European Union, which his thought process was, he made a calculation that the European Union would be fractured, the NATO would be fractured, and none of this would happen. And every objective he had the counter. It was a counterproductive in everything. He misread the room, he misjudged the situation, and we have to give credit to where it's due. There's been soft power, and soft power has been deployed with NATO, with current administrations and things like that I didn't think possible prior to maybe 2018, 2017. And this has come to fruition. The vice president was in Europe the last few weeks, and there was a lot of things happening behind doors that we're seeing. I mean, the U.S. is not leading this; they're letting the European Union. But there was a lot of conversations that happened in those forums 3 or 4 weeks ago, where now you even have Switzerland famously being neutral, even during the Nazis, taking a stand here for a reason. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Nothing happens by happenstance. He has his agenda, and his agenda turns out that it did not go the way he wanted to. And the only way I see this, like you're saying, is happening, there's no concessions that are going to be done. It is going to be a matter of, he's going to have the issue of Chechnya, but without installing a government. He's going to probably have to go back to the Lubanks and what he has, and make that a Pyrrhic victory to what had been already taken, or what the two areas. So that's my opinion, Peter.
No, thanks. I mean, there's a lot of different points. The one thing I'm going to ask folks to do is to try and keep their points to just like one or two, because I think, we're all so passionate about this. We've had so much on our minds, and the problem that is that you make so many points that, like, we can't get back to them. So I think it would be better if we made specific points. We can comment on it. We can focus upon them, and that also allows more speakers to bring things to the table. Chris, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to address a question that Paul raised earlier about, if Putin sees himself as a Soviet, why aren't we seeing a Soviet type military response? And I think the first thing I would say is, the last major war the Soviets were in were Afghanistan. So maybe we are actually seeing a Soviet era conventional response. But moreover, and I would love to hear other people's thoughts on this, but the last 10 years or so, I've kind of closely followed Soviet nuclear doctrine, and they have really focused on modernizing their nuclear arsenal if and when they ever become operational, their Status 6 oceanic weapon, their SS-18, which is just an absurd strategic weapon. And I wonder if that's to the detriment of their conventional forces, even the modernization of their tactical nuclear weapons. And this is not Dr. Strangelove. I'm not suggesting we're going to go nuclear, but they have really focused on modernizing their conventional, or rather their strategic and tactical nuclear arsenals. And it certainly would seem to some detriment of their conventional forces. And I wonder if that is some recognition that their conventional forces, they lack the institutions that they had in the Soviet era to really build a strong conventional force. And they thought they might rely on their nuclear deterrence more so than their conventional abilities.
I mean, it's a hypothesis. Obviously, Putin. I thought that Putin usually kept a kind of a poker face in public, And earlier this week, somebody said, no, 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 no. Take a look what he does. He loves to chew people out in public. Like he loves to browbeat people. And so, it's like, all right, well, I'm not specifically a Putin watcher, so I'll take your word for it. And, again, we've seen this over and over and over again. So Putin's first thing is if he's not getting his way, he is bullying, right? That has been a character trait of his, apparently. I need to learn more about his psychology. I've tried to avoid it for the past 20 years. But the thing is that we need to understand why is he treating his neighbors this way now, right? And part of this is to posture and bluff and browbeat. And then from this, I've always believed that what he could do then is from that position, he can always make this conciliatory sort of gestures like, okay, well, I'll give back most of my territorial gains, but you're going to leave me with Crimea and Donbass, right? Like he's going to try and use this as a bargaining chip. This, I think he did miscalculate though that like, the NATO allies seem very, very unified. Neutral countries have also rallied to the cause. Like, whatever he thought he was going to do, whoever he thought he was going to bully, it's finally like the time when everybody on the block goes like, let's stand up to the bully. So I think he's grossly miscalculated this so far. Christopher, you've had a hand up, and then we'll go to Aaron. Go ahead, Christopher.
It's a weird, Peter. Every time I'm about to make a comment, you always lead me in with, ironically, very much the thing I'm thinking, which I think you're right. This was supposed to be a bargaining chip. And I think I misread the situation insofar as I didn't think there would be a war or a full-scale invasion, which is pretty much what's happening and from the south and the east. But yeah, it was supposed to be a bargaining chip, and so that they could always have that sort of insurance of Lugansk and Donetsk, like, oh, we'll have these guys as a buffer between Ukraine and Russia. But I just have to say, it's absolutely imperative that people understand that this has a lot to do with NATO. Again, we don't want to take the comment about the Soviet Union out of context and say, oh, Putin wants the Soviet Union again. Absolutely not true. I mean, maybe if I were like a 70-year-old, like who grew up in like the 70s and then was like a 30-year-old in the 80s, understanding, oh, the Soviets are the bad enemy. I mean, they were, but there's no Soviet Union anymore. I mean, when you see 14 countries join NATO after Manfred Warner says they're not going to expand, I mean, there's certainly going to be a conflict. I mean, whether it's not about even taking a side, it's simply about understanding both sides and understanding why one group would have an issue with the other group. And again, always we need to read to understand Putin. We have to hear what he says. In like 2007, he made it very clear that it was a serious provocation when NATO bases were getting closer and closer to the east towards a Warsaw Pact that no longer existed. So it absolutely is NATO. It's that Putin's concerned about. Like it would
can I like let me okay again we want to keep these to like more discrete kind of points, and you just made one that I want to hop on and respond to like a jazz riff here, right? So here's the thing. I don't care what the motivation is behind the murderer who's trying to stab my sister. I don't care what his motivation is while he's plunging that knife at her. I want to intercept that knife. I want to stop that knife. And later on, once that my sister is safe, I can find out what happened to this guy. Later on, once she is safe, we can ask, what drove him to this. But right now, we're dealing with the fact that a man with a knife is charging your sister. So a lot of these kind of Putin-esque kind of like tea reading and mind reading and telepathic, analysis, psychological analysis, that's great, but there are literal people dying. And the first thing I think we need to do is focus upon getting the intelligence to the world about what's happening, find out how we can pass this information to people, who can use it. How do we ameliorate this conflict, get it to stop? We can worry about Putin's, whole belief systems later, but I don't think he should be dictating, the fact that we can't stop violence until we figure out what his motivations are. I think that's the wrong way about going about this stuff. Does that make sense, Christopher?
Yeah, again, I mean, 100%. It's not about like, oh, well, I mean, I know all these residential areas in Kharkov and Kiev are getting bombed, but let's understand his side. Obviously that would be very wholly inappropriate. I think it's just I think people need to stop again with unintelligent comments about like, oh, it's the Bolshevik Revolution over again. This isn't the 1980s. President is not Ronald Reagan. Let's stop. I mean, it's kind of like a dumb boomer who just watches like Fox.
No, but again, if somebody's attacking my sister with a knife, I need to stop that man with the knife, and then we can talk. All right?
Yeah, well put, man.
Okay, Aaron, you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Ryan.
So I just have a question for. Certainly, I've been watching. So I just have a question for a man who has no name. What class of ship are you on? Or can you tell us? I mean, I'm just wondering. What class of? Yeah, I'm
No,
just
I
wondering what
am
class
no
of ship.
longer active duty. I was an XO. I am an engineer. I was XO for quite a few years.
All right, and also, Aaron, I'm gonna check ourselves too. We have been asked by the community to keep our own kind of crosstalk and shop talk to a minimum. So maybe you guys want to become mutual friends, and then you can talk all you want. But we're going to focus tonight on Ukraine. Ryan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Peter, I just wanted to just on that last point about you don't really care what's in somebody's mind when they're stabbing your sister. Yeah, I mean I think that's a great point. And what do you think? What do you think about 39 countries submitting their support to the International Criminal Court to launch an immediate investigation into war crimes? Do you think that it's going to help, and do you think that it may expedite the sort of pretext for maybe getting Putin out?
Again, these are hypotheticals, and it's moving further and further away from the OSN core, which is we're supposed to be taking a look at maps, trying to take a look at armor, trying to see what's going on the ground. We can postulate here. I hope it does something, to move the world, but that's not our area of expertise. I do, for instance, though, if somebody wants to open up a channel about the legal ramifications of what's happened, and they want to get folks that are more expert in that, please do. I don't want to pretend like this is the only sort of Russian space, or OSINT is the only narrative that can happen. I've already said that this weekend I want to hold, for instance, a digital humanity to our core, if that makes sense, because it's our competency. And again, I'm glad that people want to know about my opinion, but I'm just a dude on the internet. Okay, Osip,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think it's important though, because the OSN community can actually potentially provide information.
Yes, well, number one, that is already happening. There are already people who are like documenting war crimes. You do not want to see the photos that they're collecting, but again, this is the patient, dark, quiet, image after image, video after video, archiving it so that if they get deleted for content purposes off of social media, that these things, there are people that do that. God bless them, and OSINT kind of plays into that, but it's just a different aspect. I think it's just a different thing. You see what I'm saying?
Anyway. I see the work that's being done in the OSN community is just extremely important, just as you described, and I just want everybody to be aware that international criminal court investigation is now starting.
Oh, definitely. And by the way, I mean, I know a company that does this kind of work, kind of open source intelligence. And they do it for like kids. horrendous crimes. It's just the you know, we're focusing on a different aspect of war fighting, I would say. Okay, go ahead, Osik.
I just kind of wanted to piggyback off of you and say this is a problem we've been running into because we started holding these spaces before the invasion, and there would be 2-3 minutes of silence where all the OSIT people are just on their computers trying to find new information that's coming up, and then now whenever we have quiet moments like this, we found kind of these OSIT groups veer off of just strict intel gathering and more into these conversations. And one thing we've realized from that is there should be places where those other conversations can happen. Like Peter said, he's planning on hosting a space, I think either Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah, I'll try and do it Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah, that's in the same realm, but kind of off topic. So I think that might put it into context a little bit more of how we do have to kind of dance around topics and try as best to stay in a certain direction, because that's the direction of the OSINT community. We just don't have any information to go through right now. So yeah, just broader context. Usually not when we hold these spaces with 2,000 people in them. We strictly just do intelligence and gathering intelligence, and that's our focus. So not saying all of that's not important and that those conversations shouldn't be had. Yeah, I mean I can say I'm not used to it, you know, because I'm strictly more of intelligence than anything else. But so yeah, just kind of wanted to back up what Peter said and point out what the OSINT community was as of like a week and a half ago before before all this. We never had to worry about things trailing off. So yeah, new thing for us as a community too, and we are trying to address it by making new spaces. Sirens in Kiev, that's the first time that I heard it happen, even throughout the night. But we are trying to address it by creating avenues and pushing people to open geopolitics spaces and humanitarian spaces and things like that.
All right, Chris, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, two things. I just want to say, you know, I'm kind of on the opposite. I'm more of a policy and doctrine guy than an OSINT guy. I'm new to that. So if I can help you at all, and I don't mean in terms of like expertise, I mean in terms of facilitating, please, I'm happy to help. So, and then to pivot more back to the intelligence side, I think, you know, I think Russia capturing Odessa is an important key element of this fight. So what's the latest on the Odessa region?
All quiet on the Black Sea front right now. There's been again, this is not the first night that we have stayed. There have been night after night where I'm like, what's going on in Odessa? What's going on? And there have been like these demonstrations, and the flotilla sailed away, and then it shows up back at Sevastopol. There have been rumors that the Marine Forces commander that saw what happened to VDV at, you know, and just how they were just cut to ribbons, balked. But again, this is more, so here's an example. That's a human issue, right? That's trying to find out, like, what's the buzz? What are soldiers saying, right? That's not OSINT, because no commander is going to say, oh yeah, I told my superior to get stuffed. Like that's not an OSINT thing. That's a human thing, or a SIGINT, right? You're going to find that through either listening to the channel or finding out from a human agent, you know, what, you know, that'll pass along a message. Very dangerous, by the way. Somebody tried to ask me, hey, I know somebody in Russia. Do you want information from them? I said, you know what? Let me ask you, do you want your friend arrested and shot as a traitor? Because that's what you're asking your friend to be doing right now. So no, tell your friend, I hope, you know, he hunkers down, he does whatever he needs to do, you know, but don't ask him to spy for me and to get, you know, charged with treason. Like, don't do that, right? But there are people who have chosen that, and they are part of human, or they are part of SIGINT or whatever, right? But that's why we say OSINT, right? Open source intelligence here. What can we find out through, you know, for instance, somebody was saying, you know, OSINT also includes paid services. Like, it's not just stuff that you can Google and find it open. It might be behind a walled garden. It might be in an ad tech platform, right? It might be in a satellite system that you may have to pay a subscription for. You know, so that's also OSINT, but but we're not true spooks here. We're not, we're not really cybersecurity specialists. And I think that, again, everybody wants to know all these things about what's going on and how they can help. And we found, as much as we can, we try and open the space to, everybody wants to get involved in every single way, but there are kind of limits to the domain. And when everything is OSINT, then nothing is OSINT. So that's why, like, sometimes we will entertain a little bit of policy discussion or a little bit of future thinking, but we try and deal as much as possible with actuals and factuals. That's my statement. What can we see? What do we have photographic evidence of? What do we see on a map? What do we see? What are people saying on Telegram? We want to deal with that as much as possible. And again, please, if you have friends in Russia, don't get them in trouble. There was a reporter tonight that she said she was texting a friend who was driving manically to get to, I think it was the Finnish border or the Estonian border, something like that, because they heard that there's going to be martial law and like a draft. And that person says, "Stop texting me. Stop texting me. They're going to search my phone at the border. I'm trying to delete every text I've ever gotten from you." Right? I mean, that's the level of threat that these people are living under. So, again, we're going to try and deal with as much as we can. But this is really dicey for folks.
Peter, Grammar just good on your Grammar. Just posted that there's arid sirens in Kyiv again. I just wanted to point that out there. Thanks.
All right.